what's going on in the Middle East. The Israeli military has warned that Hamas leaders are dead men walking as fighting continues in Gaza City. Meanwhile, the UN chief has said that the number of civilians killed in Gaza shows there is something, in his words, clearly wrong with Israel's military operations. Antonio Guterres said the terrible image, he says, coming out of Gaza did not help public opinion of Israel. Is it all about the PR? Is it all about doing the right thing to defend your country? Well, joining me right now to talk about this and plenty more is the author Douglas Murray, who is in Israel right now as he prepares to visit the Israeli-Gaza border. Good afternoon to you, Douglas.
Good to be with you, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, you've travelled to Israel. You're hoping to go to the border. I'm going to suggest, please, Douglas.
No, I've already been at the border.
You're on the border. I don't want you to go into Gaza. I want to keep you safe, if you don't mind. But tell us what, just first of all, what you make of Israel's response so far to the horrific Hamas terrorist attack on October the 7th. We're just a month and a bit over the anniversary of that. And the reaction of the world to their actions since then.
Well, I mean, it's worth remembering, I actually was at the Gaza border yesterday, and it was, among other things, that one of the massacre sites, two of the massacre sites, actually, the music festival site and the massacre in one of the villages, communities just by the Gaza border, which was pretty much wiped out on the 7th of October, and is still a sort of bloody, burnt crime scene. I think it's very important the rest of the world at least spends more than just a beat on the fact that on October the 7th, it was the largest massacre of Jews anywhere since the Holocaust. It was an unbelievable set of atrocities. And I think there's two things that really need to be remembered about this. The first is the fact that the group who did it, Hamas, has repeatedly said in the days and weeks since that it hopes to do more October the 7th style massacres, and indeed that it intends to do so until the Jewish state is wiped out. So for all the people saying, you know, there should be some kind of compromise and much more, I think they need to take that into account, and I see very few of them who do. The second thing is, of course, and you and I have discussed this before, but there's always this issue of Israel is allowed to do something in response, but not very much. It's allowed to fight to some kind of status quo ante, but is not allowed to win. You know, the eyes of the world are always on the Israeli military, and they always say the same things. They say that there's going to be a lack of proportionality in the response. They talk about, they always make claims like genocide when no such thing has gone on or will go on. And, you know, you can see it on the ground. The Israelis have asked the people, the citizens of Hamas, the citizens of Gaza who are not Hamas, to move south. Hamas massacred Gazan civilians as they tried to go south. It was initially reported by the BBC and others that that was the Israeli military who carried out those massacres. It wasn't. It was Hamas trying to keep the populations in the north so that they would remain as human shields. All of the deaths in Gaza are totally avoidable, and they would be avoidable, and it could all stop tomorrow if Hamas decided, first of all, to return any of the hostages they have, any of the hundreds of hostages they have who are still alive, and secondly, to put down their arms and stop trying to destroy and wipe out the Jewish state. All of this could stop tomorrow. Hamas has had billions of dollars of funding from the international community, from British taxpayers and others. And what have we got for it? We've got Hamas leaders living in luxury resorts that they build abroad with the money we send them. And secondly, we have this situation in Gaza where instead of building what they could have done, a Singapore-on-Sea, they instead built this extraordinary network of tunnels which they use to protect Hamas fighters and to endanger the lives of Palestinians in Gaza. So all of this needs to be kept in mind. I think much of it has already been lost in the international arena.
Yeah, indeed, and when you have the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, constantly criticising the Israeli response, when actually virtually every military person I speak to, we've got Philip Ingram in the studio, we'll come back to him a little bit later as well, saying that actually, you know, in terms of, you know, proportionality, what Israel is doing is perfectly within the realms of you know, international law when it comes to warfare. Civilians do get killed in wars. That is a sad, terrible tragedy of life. But they're particularly more likely to get killed when an organisation like Hamas choose to put their military hardware and their bases and fire missiles from civilian areas. They build tunnels and hide underneath hospitals and schools. It is Hamas that is responsible for that. And yet we see so little criticism of Hamas, a proscribed terrorist organisation, compared with criticism of a democratically elected government in Israel. What do you put that down to?
Well, it's lots of things. I mean, one is pure ignorance. I do take it for granted that some of the people who go around the streets of London, particularly non-Muslims, chanting things like "from the river to the sea," don't know what sea they're talking about and couldn't identify the river in question, even if you gave them a clue and asked them to find it on a map. So there are some people who are just wildly ignorant. And we also have a problem that we have a very large population, largely, I have to say, and it's very politically incorrect, but nevertheless it's true, a very large imported population in the UK who are significantly, in their numbers, anti-Semitic. In countries like Britain and Germany, after the Second World War, anti-Semitism was absolutely chased out of public life in the UK. You could find these disgusting, tiny, tiny little rumps of right-wing anti-Semites, but they were nowhere near power, and they never would have been. They just sort of did their toxic stuff in their little upstairs rooms. There has been an eruption of anti-Semitism on the left of politics in countries like Germany and Britain in recent decades, most obviously in the UK with the election of Jeremy Corbyn as Labour Party leader. But, you know, the main driver of anti-Semitism in the West, in Europe, in countries like Britain and Germany in recent years, has been from the importing of millions of people from the Muslim world. And, you know, even somebody who's a very close enemy of mine, Mehdi Hassan, said some time ago in a piece, he said, all Muslims know what I'm talking about when I say that anti-Semitism is, quote, our dirty little secret. He said, it always comes up at the dinner table, over dinner. There's always people who talk about the Jews having organised 9/11 and much, much more. It is the dirty little secret that's now out in the open, in my view, of Muslim communities in the UK and elsewhere. And I know that this is the case because, and I've said this many times in recent days, but it bears repeating. In recent years, hundreds of thousands of Muslims have been killed in Yemen, and there has not been 1% of the population on the streets there has been in recent weeks. In the last 13 years, 12 years since the civil war began in Syria, hundreds of thousands of Muslims have been killed. More Muslims have been killed in the last decade in Syria than in every side of every conflict involving Israel since the foundation of the state at the request of the UN in 1948. But we have not seen 1% of the people on the streets of London and other cities over the Syrian civil war, as we have in the last few weeks. Why? Because there is something about the Jewish state defending itself that deeply wounds and aggrieves large numbers of British people, principally, it has to be said, the radical left and Muslims in the UK.
And it is so noticeable, that, isn't it? Yesterday we spoke on the show to Chris Williamson, a former Labour MP, a close ally of Jeremy Corbyn, someone who was ousted from the party, suspended, lost his seat. I think we can understand why. And he likened he very openly said, he said the Israeli government's actions were, quote, worse than the Nazis. He described the situation in Gaza as living in a concentration camp. I said to him, why don't you just save everyone time and just come on the show and just say, I don't like Jewish people? Because that, to me, is what it felt like he was saying. Do you think that is, you know, when we talk about, I mean, when people talk about Zionism, being anti-Zionist, things, that actually, that is what they mean?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry that the mask is completely off these people. There is one Jewish state in the world, and it was set up because the Jewish people could not be protected in any country in the world. And that has been the case for millennia now. And the fact that their historic homeland, where I'm standing at the moment, had the state re-established in 1948 was in large part because Jews believed rightly, in my view, that they needed to look after themselves because the world would not defend them. What you see in the streets of London at the moment is a reminder of that. It's not Muslims who fear being on the streets of London. It's not even Muslims chanting for jihad who fear being on the streets of London. It's Jews who fear being on the streets of London. I hear of no Hamas supporter who fears and worries about their time in the UK. They're having a great time. They're collecting social welfare benefits, among other things. One of the heads of Hamas in the UK, a man called Mohammed Sawalha, has been taking British payments from the taxpayer for years to work for Hamas in the UK. I don't see people like him being worried about being in Britain. It's calls from Jewish friends that I get from Britain and abroad saying, I don't want to go into the centre of town on weekends anymore. So there is every reason to recognise that what is going on at the moment is a virulent assault on the one Jewish state in the world for protecting its citizens from massacre. And there's one other thing that's important to state about this, which is this, Julia. You know, there are all these people who use the kind of language that Chris Williamson used with you yesterday. They talk about Nazis, they talk about genocide, they talk about concentration camps and the Warsaw Ghetto. Why do they choose this language? There are many situations in the world today, as have been for decades, where wars happen, where terrible things happen out of necessity or human evil or otherwise. Pakistan at the moment is forcibly deporting 2 million people from Pakistan into Afghanistan. Where is the outrage on the streets from Muslim Britons? Nowhere. Nowhere. All the Muslim British people who have their origins in Pakistan are silent about this. They don't care about deporting 2 million people. But here's the thing, Julia. Why do they use language like Nazi, genocide, extermination, concentration camps about the one Jewish state in the world? They do it because they want to hurt and wound Jews.
It's very
you
carefully
could use any number. You could use any number of analogies to talk about what the IDF is doing at the moment in Gaza. Any number of military analogies, using examples from British military history, from French military history.
But they choose that one. I'm going to interrupt you there.
They choose this one.
OK, I want to talk to you more about what's going on in terms of London and Suella Braverman's comments about these march planned on Armistice Day on Saturday and, of course, demands for a ceasefire, who that benefits as well.